What's up, gamer? My name's Luco, and today I'm going to give you all the details about how items work in Path of Exile 2. This is going to be pretty basic information, but knowing these things is foundational to understanding what kinds of things are possible on different kinds of items, and how people talk about gear in general. The first thing we need to talk about is item base types. An item's base type is basically what specific kind of item it is within the slot that it takes up. For example, everybody wants to wear gloves, but if your build needs armor, you'll want to wear gloves like riveted mitts. If your build needs evasion, you'll want to wear gloves like firm bracers, and if your build needs energy shield, you'll want to wear stitch gloves instead. So an item's base type determines what kind of defenses or other base stats an item has, how much of those stats they start with, and may slightly change which modifiers could be rolled on that item. As you progress your character, you should make sure you upgrade your items to higher tier bases as often as possible to keep your character from getting overpowered by the monsters you find later in the game. Next, let's look at rarity. There are 4 levels of rarity an item can have in Path of Exile 2, and each is denoted by a different color. From lowest to highest rarity, they are common, which is white, magic, which is blue, rare, which is yellow, and unique, which is orange. An item's rarity determines how many explicit modifiers that item can have. Common items can't have any explicit modifiers at all, magic items have up to 2 explicit modifiers, rare items have up to 6 magic modifiers, and unique items have specific modifiers on them that, for the most part, can't be changed. Generally speaking, the more explicit modifiers you can fit on a piece of non-unique gear, the stronger it is. I've been talking about explicit modifiers this whole time, so let's talk about those next. Explicit modifiers are the ones you see in the lowest section of the item's tooltip. When you identify an item, explicit modifiers are selected randomly from a pool of possible modifiers that's different from item type to item type. Helmets and gloves have different mod pools, and armor gloves even have a slightly different mod pool from, say, evasion gloves. If you want to see all of the explicit modifiers that a specific kind of gear can roll, you can use a website like PoE2 which I'll link in the description to see all the possible outcomes. Each explicit modifier has values that are rolled randomly within a specific range. For example, these gloves have 133 life on them, but if you're playing on PC and you hold Alt while mousing over them, or push and hold the right stick button if you're playing on console, you'll see the item's advanced information. That information shows that this modifier could have had anywhere from 120 to 149 life, and it just so happened to roll 133 within that range. The values of this range are also randomly selected from a set of potential ranges called the Modifier Tiers. While you're still looking at the item's advanced information, if you look to the right of the modifier, you'll see a letter followed by a number. The letter is T, which stands for tier, while the number denotes which tier the modifier rolled. The lower the tier, the lower the range's values will be. This life modifier says tier 9, which happens to be the highest tier that the life modifier can reach on gloves. A tier 1 life modifier is more like 10 to 19 life. If you look at the other side of the item's advanced information, you'll see it says prefix and highlights the top section of mods, then suffix where it highlights the bottom section. If you look at that PoE2 website that I mentioned earlier, you'll see that it also has the modifiers split into 2 different tables for prefixes and suffixes. That's because all the prefix modifiers are pulled from the prefix table on the left, while all of the suffix modifiers are pulled from the suffix table on the right. Earlier I said magic items could only have up to 2 modifiers, while rare items could have up to 6. Those modifiers are evenly split between prefixes and suffixes. So magic items can have 1 prefix and 1 suffix, while rare items can have up to 3 prefixes and 3 suffixes. Things like life, mana, and defenses, such as armor and evasion rating, are usually prefix modifiers, while things like attributes and resistances are usually suffix modifiers. So that's it for explicit modifiers, but where there are explicit modifiers, there must be implicit modifiers. Implicit modifiers are shown in a section above the explicit modifiers in the same dark blue color. The biggest difference between explicit and implicit modifiers is that implicits are not random and they cannot be changed. Implicit modifiers are basically stats that are associated with an item's base type. For example, this amber amulet has a couple of explicit modifiers, but above them you can see it has an implicit modifier which gives 10 strength. If you look at the item's advanced information by pressing and holding Alt or the right stick, you'll see that the implicit mod also has a range from 10 to 15. So it can be rolled differently within that range, but implicit modifiers don't have tiers. All amber amulets will always have an implicit strength modifier even if they drop at common rarity, and that strength modifier's value will always be between 10 and 15. Implicit modifiers most commonly appear on rings, amulets, and belts, but there are some specific weapon and armor bases that have implicits as well. There's one other kind of modifier that can appear on items. That kind of modifier is called an enchantment, and enchantments appear on items in a section above the explicits, similar to implicits, but enchantments have a much lighter blue color. If an item has both an implicit and an enchantment, the enchantment will usually go above the implicit. Enchantments come from 3 different sources. The first and most common source is runes. If an item has a socket, you can put a rune into it and add some extra power to your gear. The modifier granted by that rune will show in that light blue color above the rest of the modifiers. The next source of enchantments is from corrupting items with Val Orbs. When you use a Val Orb on an item, that item will become corrupted, which means its modifiers can no longer be changed, but some other random effect may or may not be applied to that item at the same time in the corrupting process. One of the possible outcomes is to add a random enchantment to the item from a list of modifiers that you can find on the PoE2 Wiki, which I'll also link in the description. But it's important to know that corrupting an item is a risky thing to do because one of the possible outcomes is to randomize up to 3 of the item's modifiers, which could potentially ruin the item. So corrupt items at your own risk, but if you do corrupt an item and it does happen to get a corruption enchantment, that will show above the rest of the modifiers in that same light blue color as the rune enchantment. The final source of enchantments is from a process called instilling, which can only be done to amulets, and it's something you won't come across until you reach the endgame and start doing the delirium mechanic. I'll go into it a little more if I make a video about delirium, but basically an amulet that has a light blue modifier which says it'll locate something means that it's been instilled, and equipping that amulet will give you the notable node on the atlas tree that has the name listed on the amulet. So this amber amulet has been instilled with the pliable flesh node, which means that wearing it will give me the benefit of that node even if it's not connected to the rest of my tree. That's just about everything you need to know about just about any item you'll find in Path of Exile 2. The one thing we didn't talk about was the quality stat, but that does so many things on so many different items that it needs its own video, which I've already made and I'll link in the description below the other resources I mentioned earlier if you want to know more. But for now, that's it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me in the comments. If you found this guide helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe for more like it. Lastly, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in another video.